Good evening. My name is Michael Ulrich, Director of NY Washington, D.C. Thank you all for joining us at rush hour on a busy night and voting day as well. I'm happy to welcome you to the Abramson Family Auditorium for the inaugural Weissberg Forum for Discourse in the Public Square. We're grateful for the generosity of the Weissberg family, with special thanks to Nina, who's joining us tonight. I'm also grateful to Tom McIntyre and Shruti Ramadugu from Washington, D.C., who organized two forums this week. The first one is tonight and another on Thursday. We'll be examining how reform measures and policy choices affect the immigrant community. Tonight, we convene to discuss the evolving debate over comprehensive immigration reform unfolding in the United States, with a focus on comparative and global perspectives to provide insight for our domestic policies. We invite you back on our second panel for Thursday evening, where we will examine specifically the immigration policies of the United States affecting young, undocumented, and documented immigrants and their access to education, healthcare, and employment. I am honored to introduce you to Governor Martin O'Malley, currently serving the people of Maryland in his second term as governor. Since 2007, his administration has been creating jobs, expanding opportunity, and making Maryland a safer, healthier place to live. The Baltimore Sun credited his administration with accomplishing more in 1 year than most administrations accomplish in 4. Declaring that Marylanders are bound together by the common thread of human dignity, Governor O'Malley has signed legislation to protect individual civil marriage rights, religious freedoms, and voting rights. He signed and successfully defended at the ballot box the DREAM Act, which expands the opportunity of a college education to more Marylanders. Governor O'Malley, we're happy to welcome you to NYU Washington, D.C.
Good evening. It's wonderful to be here with all of you, and I want to thank Michael Ulrich for his kind welcome and everybody here at NYU and the Global Academic Center. I understand that we are being broadcast globally on the internet, so it was wonderful to be here with all of you. And I thank you so very, very much for hosting this discussion, and I'm looking forward to the panel. I also want to acknowledge that we are joined in the audience by former Congressman Bruce Morrison, who's done so much good work for our republic and the life of our republic, recognizing the genius of America and the importance of the immigrant experience to the ongoing journey of our country. So, Bruce, it is wonderful to see you here. Thank you for making the time tonight. As we begin our panel discussion, it's my job to just lay out a few thoughts and share them with you. I would like to tell you that these are all my original thoughts, but all of these things actually came through me. And they came from my parents and my grandparents, as I suspect they came from your grandparents as well. So let's begin, shall we? I wanted to share a few thoughts with you as we begin this conversation on immigration and America's ongoing journey. And I wanted to talk with you about the very universal and very American idea of full participation. Most of our families have a story that began somewhere else. My immigrant great-grandfather, whose name also happened to be Martin O'Malley, came to this country from Ireland. His native tongue was not English. His native tongue was Irish. But the hopes and the dreams that he had for his children, the hopes and the dreams that he had for his grandchildren, were purely American. You see, he and many of his fellow new Americans of their day worked hard, and they risked their lives in the mines of southwest Arizona in his case. And what they worked for, and what they were willing to sacrifice, and yes, sometimes die for, was the ability to give their children a country of more opportunity, not a country of less. In Maryland, we believe that our diversity is our greatest strength. We believe that we all do better when we are all doing better. My friend Paul Hawken puts it in more scientific terms when he writes, quote, "Ecologists and biologists know that systems achieve stability and health through diversity, not uniformity." And he concludes, "Ideologues take the opposite view." Why in the state of Maryland are we investing record amounts in public schools? Why are we doing more than any other state to hold down the cost of college education and make college education more affordable for more families? Why did we set and exceed, even in the middle of a recession, the most ambitious goals in the nation for minority and women-owned businesses? In a word, opportunity. In 2 words, more opportunity. In 4 words, more opportunity for all. You see, the happy fact of our American democracy is this. The more fully a person participates in the economic, in the social, in the civic life of our nation, the stronger it makes our country, the stronger their individual participation makes our country. When all can fully participate, then every individual has a chance to advance and expand the common good that we all share. Father David Hollenbach of Boston College writes, "Achieving this good calls for a common life in which freedom is more fully shared, for a society in which all people more fully participate in the common good that can be achieved in their social, political, and economic activity together." So for our own good, we want more people to participate more fully, don't we? For our family's good, we want more people to vote. For our children's good, we want more students to excel in school. And yes, to go to college. We want more families to be economically secure. We want more people to be able to open businesses and create jobs. These things strengthen our democracy. They strengthen our economy. They strengthen the fiscal health of our country. And they make our country more secure. Let me touch on each of these. We have a chance with the comprehensive immigration reform bills in Congress to put America on a more prosperous path, a path of fuller participation of all in our democracy. We can bring 11 million new Americans out of the shadows and into the light of our democracy, where they can vote, where they can open businesses and create jobs, where they can lend their voices and their skills to the ongoing life of our nation, the fabric of our growing democracy. The Congressional Budget Office has done the math, and the math can be stubborn stuff. And immigration reform means that a growing population, a growing economy, and a shrinking deficit. In the first 10 years, get this, following comprehensive immigration reform, the CBO projects that we would shrink the deficit by $200 billion. In the second 10 years, by another $700 billion. Immigrants, according to the Kauffman Foundation, are almost twice as likely as other Americans to start new businesses. Businesses that support families, that create jobs, that expand opportunities in communities all across our country. By keeping 11 million immigrants in the shadows, we're quite simply missing out. By putting those Americans on the path to full citizenship, full participation, empowering them to achieve their full potential, we could create up to 203,000 new jobs per year and up to 1.4 trillion in boosting our GDP. More than half of Maryland's population growth since 2000, that is 55%, has actually been due to a growing immigrant communities compared to 30% nationally. These new Americans in our state disproportionately fill highly skilled positions, positions that are much in demand, skills that are needed. In 2006, 27% of Maryland scientists, 21% of healthcare practitioners, 19% of mathematicians and computer specialists were foreign-born. Maryland has now achieved the #1 public schools in America, and we have held that distinction for 5 years in a row. Maryland has achieved the highest median income of any state in the nation. Last year, we achieved the fastest rate of new job growth of any state in our region, and the U.S. Chamber of Commerce has now for 2 years in a row named Maryland the #1 state in America for innovation and entrepreneurship. In 2008, we had created the Maryland Council for New Americans. We saw the potential. We wanted to tap it. Through this council, we're tackling the challenges faced by many new Americans, English proficiency, job training, the transfer of professional credentials, all of the things that can inhibit a person from starting on the path to becoming a citizen. In 2011, as Michael kindly mentioned, we passed the Maryland DREAM Act so that our 36,000 Dreamers could have access to affordable higher education. Now, some who disagreed with us decided to petition the law to the ballot, and when they did so, quite honestly, the DREAM Act was running behind. It was down 55-45. But in the fullness of participation, in the fullness of conversation about what's best for all of us, the DREAM Act actually prevailed at the polls with 58% of the vote. This year, the Maryland General Assembly passed a bill that makes permanent a two-tiered driver's license system so that people can obtain insurance and drive to work safely without endangering themselves or others. Participation, civic engagement, inclusion, all of these are the things that make our republic safer as well. Recently, I had the honor to co-chair a task force for Secretary Napolitano, our former Secretary of Homeland Security, on how to counter violent, homegrown extremism. We use big words like putting together the architecture of civic engagement, but really what it was all about was full participation. We found that public-private partnerships that promote civic engagement should actually form the cornerstone, and in many places indeed are the cornerstone to prevent violent criminal activity. When we marginalize and alienate, our entire state, our entire country becomes less safe. Social exclusion breeds pockets of disconnected entities. Extremism thrives in shadows, not in the light of democracy. Partnerships like our new American Citizenship Project with Casa de Maryland, our resettlement centers in Baltimore and Silver Spring where refugees, asylees, and trafficking victims can access resources from health screenings to job training and placement are also part of this effort. We also found that law enforcement has to be part of those partnerships as well. The first time that we as a state engage a new immigrant community should not be only after a tragedy is struck. So when people vote, when people feel their hard work can make the American dream more possible for their children, then they have a share in this republic, a republic that they will defend with their lives. Conclusion, as we go to our panel. Hospitality to strangers is not an American invention. Hospitality to strangers is a deep and timeless value of human dignity. It is found in the parables and the teachings and the stories of every faith tradition. The three strangers who visit Sarah and Abraham, the disciples on the road to Emmaus, the Haditha story of the prophet feeding the strangers, and God smiled. But hospitality to strangers and full participation in the life of our democracy is an indispensable part of the genius of this opportunity expanding experiment that we love and that we call the United States of America. This is the truth of a pluribus unum. From the participation of many individuals comes the strength of one strong and living and vibrant republic. Every person is needed. Each of us must try, for truly there is no such thing as a spare American. Thank you, and I look forward to our conversation.
Thank you, Governor. I am happy to introduce Angela Maria Kelley, our Weissberg Scholar in Resident and Vice President for Immigration Policy at the Center for American Progress. In the years since Angie's arrival to American Progress, the organization has published numerous impactful reports and analyses on a range of immigration issues, including the economic impact of state anti-immigrant laws, the economic value of immigration reform, the cost of mass deportation, and the integration trends of America's newcomers. Before joining American Progress in 2009, Angie served as the director of Immigration Policy Research, Immigration Policy Center, a research and rapid response organization providing policymakers, academics, the media, and the general public with access to accurate information about the effects of immigration on the U.S. economy and society. Prior to that, she was deputy director of the National Immigration Forum, where she headed its legislative, policy, and communication activities, and oversaw its operations. Angela was also at the forefront of advocacy that secured key legislative victories, including the Legal Immigration Family Equity Act, the Haitian Refugee Immigration Fairness Act, and the Nicaraguan Adjustment and Central American Relief Act. Angela is the George Washington University Law School graduate and the proud daughter of South American immigrants. And I want to thank her for joining our students last week and sharing her personal story with us as well. So Angela, I'll invite you to welcome the panel.
Great. Thank you. Should I do opening from here and then we sit down at the panel? Is that okay? All right, great. All right, I'm a little shorter than the governor. Just lower the microphone. Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for having me. Great introduction, Michael. You made me sound wonderful. Not all true. And thank you so much for NYU for having us, or having me here, and the Weissberg family. All are terrific. So thank you all for coming to this panel discussion on what is one of the country's most current and perennial policy debates, and that is about immigration reform. It's an honor to share the stage with the governor, who has been insightful in his understanding of the current debate, and we thank you for choosing to lean in and reach out for inclusivity, and we hope many other governors would follow in your suit. I'm going to just mention a couple words about my co-panelists and then just set a little bit the stage for where we are in immigration reform today, and I'll have folks come up when I finish my introductory comments. So we're going to have on the panel Clarissa Martinez-De-Castro, and Clarissa is the Director of Immigration and National Campaigns at NCLR, National Council of Raza, which is the largest Latino organization in the U.S. Clarissa is a longtime warrior and a dear friend of mine in this fight for immigration reform. She has headed up campaigns. I've seen her take down congressmen. She is smart. She is strategic. And like me, my husband always says about both of us, small but scary, in both English and in Spanish. So I'm glad that Clarissa's here. Also joining us on the panel will be Ali Noorani, and Ali is the Executive Director of the National Immigration Forum, another colleague that I've known for years and have had the honor to work with, and I've really looked to him, as have many of us in the field, as really the voice of balance and reason in the debate. And Ali has recently spearheaded an extraordinary effort known as BBB, or Bibles, Badges, and Business. And it's to bring a more conservative voice and opinion to the debate, which has been missing, quite frankly. And he recently spearheaded an effort that had over 600 leaders in the BBB effort come to Washington to meet mainly with Republican members of Congress. It's a brilliant effort. I would call it a game changer. So hats off to Ali for that. And then last but not least on the panel is Madeleine Sumption. And Madeleine is with the Migration Policy Institute, which is really one of the lead research organizations, along with CAP, of course, in this issue area. She's the Assistant Director of International Programs there. And Madeleine is more of newer to the battle, but her fingerprints are already being felt with the extraordinary research that she does. And she's always one of our lifelines when we've got a tough research question and we need to call somebody just to get very insightful analysis. She's one of the top people that we always call. So you guys are going to have a terrific evening hearing from these different perspectives of how the immigration debate is unfolding. But first, let me just set the stage on what we're going to talk about today. So just on the state of play regarding the immigration legislation, like that unto itself is an interesting story, right? We have a bipartisan bill that passed the Senate with a super majority, right? We had Republicans and Democrats that actually worked hard, forged legislation, passed a sweeping bill. It's not perfect, but it is looking forward. It leans into what our country needs in terms of a reformed immigration system. It deals sensibly with the 11 million. It reforms our legal immigration system by increasing visa numbers and making them more sensitive and have to respond to changing economic conditions. It does create, I would think, an excessive border buildup, but it has more sensible enforcement than we've seen in the past. So this is the Senate bill that is waiting out there for a dance partner on the House side. The House, however, has not come yet to the party. The House has passed smaller measures. The Homeland Security Committee has passed a border bill. The Judiciary Committee has passed a series of small bills on E-Verify, that's an employment verification system, high-skilled immigration, an agriculture worker program, and a very tough interior enforcement piece of legislation. So these are small pieces. Piecemeal is what we've seen so far in House committees, and they're inching their way forward. And press accounts would seem to indicate that there are House Republicans that are also circling around the 11 million in considering legislation that would either deal with all of the 11 million or would deal with the Dreamers. But we're yet to see those pieces of legislation come forward. So all eyes are on one end of Pennsylvania Avenue, asking ourselves, will they come forward and by when? And because we have a Senate bill out there, it is open to be conferenced with what the House passes until December 31st, not of this year, but of next year. So while many talk about legislation needing to happen in 2013, and I think politically that would be smart for the Republicans, as a legal or legislative matter, we actually have till the end of next year. And my prediction is that this debate is going to go on in a very active way through next year. So all eyes are on the House. Advocates, the 11 million, Latino voters who have a very close association with this issue, and we'll talk about that. But just to underscore, 67% of Latino voters know someone who is undocumented. 51% have a family member who's undocumented. 39% of Latino voters know someone who's been deported or is in the queue to be deported. So there's not a lot of light of day between Latino voters on this issue in immigration reform. It's like this. But other people are watching too. The American public wants to see immigration reform done. Governors like Governor O'Malley and others, because states have to make a choice. Are we going to lean into it like Governor O'Malley, Governor Brown of California, or are we going to go the Jan Brewer route, the governor of Arizona, and keep trying to pound away and kick people out? And our neighbors across the pond, as Madeleine is going to talk to us about. They're looking to us, other nations in Europe, in how we deal with folks here without papers. Our neighbors to the south, Mexico, has an extraordinary interest in this issue as well. But while all eyes are right now on one end of Pennsylvania Avenue, you can also imagine them shifting to the other end of Pennsylvania Avenue. Because the truth is that under this administration, there's been a record number of people deported. 1 million before Obama's first term ended. 2 million, likely by Christmas Day of this year. That's extraordinary. 1,100 people a day, by the end of today, will not be coming home. They're going to be on buses and airplanes leaving the United States. Of those 1,100, the undocumented, 45% of them live in families. 2/3 of them have lived here for more than 10 years. So they're not going to go back home because they are home. This is their home. So that's just a state of play around the legislation. But the backdrop is fascinating, that this debate is happening. We have changing demographics, more people of color, I think better looking as a result. The country is changing. A changing economy. The governor talked about the importance of immigration reform to our economy. We leave dollars on the table each day that we don't pass reform. We have a broken immigration system with the same number of visas every year for high-skilled workers, the same number of visas every year for low-skilled workers, 5,000 a year. It's a joke. Against the most dynamic economy in the world. And that's what we do? It's beneath us. And I think, lastly, it's against the backdrop of a changing morality, right? The moral fiber, the character of how we treat the undocumented. If for so long they've been the other, the silent, the secret, the shadow. And I think that's changing. They're not the other. They're us. And it's a question of a character of our country and how will we treat them. So with that, I'd love to welcome my panelists. I want to go boy, girl. That's what my mom always taught me. So we'll have the governor here, Clarissa, me, Ali, and Madeleine. So thank you all. Let's get started. All right. Great. Governor, you up for leading us off?
I guess so. That's what this is? Okay.
You are on. Okay, great.
Do I need to hold this, or
I don't think you should.
you just put it right here?
I think it's magic for you.
These-
I had to wear it for some reason. I think it's to make my necklace go like that. So, Governor, thank you so much for your opening comments and for being here. It is truly an honor to have you.
Where's mine?
And what I want you to describe for the audience is the Maryland battle around the Maryland DREAM Act, right? Because it passed, and then the opposition was able to qualify a ballot initiative that would have undone the DREAM Act before it was even implemented, and they lost.
That's right. It was the DREAM Act was actually passed a couple of years before it even went to referendum. So in a legislative session where we came up short that year, actually on marriage equality, the DREAM Act sailed through, and we were all delighted, but we were all somewhat surprised because we had not anticipated that the DREAM Act would go through that year. We thought we're all going to put our shoulders here, we'll do marriage equality, DREAM Act we need to talk about some more, and we'll get that next year. But I guess that's why we actually have a legislative session. If we knew how everything would turn out, there'd be no sense in doing it. So surprise, pleasant surprise, the DREAM Act passed, but it also caught us a little flat-footed, and the opponents were able to paint it falsely as free tuition for illegal immigrants. There began an effort to better explain and more accurately explain what the DREAM Act did, which said that if you went to a Maryland high school, your parents pay Maryland taxes, you qualify, therefore, for in-state tuition, regardless of where you might be in the naturalization queue. And then we had to wage a campaign because our brothers and sisters in the opposition decided to petition this measure to the ballot. And so we found ourselves in a year when there were already many other things on the ballot. President Obama's re-election, congressional redistricting map, which they also petitioned. By that time, marriage equality, which they also petitioned. We had the DREAM Act. And in the broad language that we use to talk about many of those things, we use the simple word dignity, the dignity of every child's home, the dignity of every individual. And we found that that was a big and inclusive and also very effective word. We had to raise money, as you might imagine. The Dream Kids did not have a PAC. So that work was done. We're on the phones. Frankly, a lot of our allies in organized labor stepped up. Some very generous individuals like Mrs. Jobs stepped up. And we managed to wage a campaign slice by slice by slice, mostly using social media and the internet. And by the end, the DREAM Act prevailed with 58% of the vote, as everyone concluded that there's potential and dignity in every child, and every child should be able to grow to their fullest. And part of the language of this was also talking about the fact that this is about us. This is not about the other.
Exactly.
This is not just about the immigrant or the immigrant children. This is about us. And we want our children to grow up in an America where every child is able to work hard and develop and therefore contribute to their fullest potential.
It's terrific. It was a real victory. Thank you for leading the charge on that. So by the way, folks, this is going to be Oprah style. I'm Oprah. You don't have a car key underneath your seat, sorry. Or you could talk to the funder for this event. Anyway, so what we're going to do is I'm going to ask each of the folks on the panel a question, but I really want this to be a conversation, all right? So you can't leave me to do all the talking. But Clarissa, I'll go to you next. All right, girl, you've been in this field a long time through many battles. So give us a score. How strong is the movement today, and how did it get to where it is?
You know, I think that the interesting thing about immigration is that the biggest irony about this debate is that there's actually more consensus on the issue than you would think by looking at the media or the tone of the conversation in Washington, D.C. And I think the reason that we are getting and have gotten stronger to the point that it has become a dominant theme of conversation in Washington, D.C., as it has been in many states, is that we are more able to reflect how the forces behind in pushing for immigration reform represent every segment of American society in a much more clear way than we used to be able to do in the past. That has been very important. Angie's talked about the effort that Ali is part of. But, if you look at the forces arguing for immigration, you'd be hard-pressed to match them on the other side, right? You have from conservatives and progressives, Republicans, Democrats, business, labor, Catholics, evangelicals, Latinos, Asians, blacks. I mean, you can point at any segment, big business, small business, high tech, growers, et cetera, et cetera. And I think that we've all been working a lot more together and a lot stronger to bring that to the forefront. That's one thing. Coming from a Latino organization, I think that the other thing that became very apparent for us as an organization and many sister organizations in the Latino community was that immigration was an issue that both as a policy issue and as a civil rights issue is of crucial importance to our community. And we will have a chance to talk about that a little bit more. But that an extension of that policy interest, we needed to then take the campaign and extend it to our electoral participation. And so in 2012, many of our organizations decided to come together and really connect the dots between electoral participation and transformative policy change. And thankfully, due to the work of many in and outside the Latino community, we were able to create a moment, two important political moments in 2012. I think most folks recognize election night and the immediate firing up of conversations, particularly in conservative circles, about needing to do immigration reform. But there was a moment prior to that that was also equally important, and that is when the Obama administration decided to enact relief for dreamers. That was an important political moment because it was also a recognition of something that voters know everywhere, which is we need something to vote for, not just something to vote against. And the Obama administration recognized that there was an enthusiasm problem with the Latino electorate, that actions are louder than words, and that action was lacking also on the part of Democrats. And I think that really accelerated something that many folks in the immigrant community had been arguing for and not been able to happen, and finally came to fruition in DACA. So two important political moments, one more recognized on the political side of the spectrum, the other one definitely on the Democratic side of the spectrum. And that's why I think we're stronger. And we're going to have to continue firing on all of those engines in order to get this to the finish line. But I remain optimistic because I think that together we've been able to finally punch back against what had become conventional wisdom, however wrong it was, that if you're an elected official, you should not touch the issue of immigration. And the only way to touch it is to be punitive. I think we're finally fighting back that notion and creating both the pressure and the space to make sure that action takes place.
Great. All right, so let's pick up a little bit from what Clarissa has just said, and let me turn to you, Ali. So we've come a long way, baby, just like the old slogan. You saw, though, a lane, I think, a couple years back that needed to be filled, and you came up with a really great name that I finally know all the B's for. So it's business, Bibles, and badges. Belts does not appear in the BBB, although for months I would say it very confidently. People were always like, belts.
Belt makers are big.
Exactly.
So move a lot of us.
Exactly. So talk to me about BBB, sure. And if you can, hook it up a little bit with some of Clarissa's observations about just how much power we've gained over time.
Sure. Well, first of all, thank you very much to NYU and everybody here for organizing the panel and the invitation. Governor, thank you very much for everything you've done in Maryland. So what we saw at the forum is that in order to win, and this isn't brain surgery, but in order to win and pass a law in Congress, you need 279 votes. You need 60 in the Senate, 218 in the House, and you need the signature of the president. So all we did in 2010, after that midterm election, after the DREAM Act was defeated, is look at the map. And when you look at the map of that Senate vote, you notice that the least amount of political support exists in the Southeast, the Midwest, and the Mountain West. Now, typically I use like some very colorful slides, so I'm going to move my hands a little bit. But those three regions had, like I said, the least amount of support. We either got 2 no votes in the Senate or we got a split. And then we looked at, okay, how do we move those votes? How do we make sure that these members of Congress are feeling the support, but also the pressure from their districts to get behind reform? And we looked at 3 constituencies: the faith community, law enforcement, and business. In terms of the faith community, the largest number of evangelical Christians live in the Southeast, the Midwest, and the Mountain West. In terms of law enforcement, the highest density of state and local law enforcement are actually in the Southeast, the Midwest, and the Mountain West. To measure business, what we did is looked at the growth in the foreign-born population as a proxy for a young, growing, but stable workforce. Same 3 regions: the Southeast, the Midwest, and the Mountain West. So all we did is overlap the maps. And those 3 regions have the least amount of political support for reform, the highest number of evangelicals, the highest density of state and local law enforcement, and the fastest growth in the foreign-born population. Hence, if you hold a Bible, you wear a badge, or you own a business, you want a common sense solution to the immigration system. That was the entire our hypothesis. So over the last couple of years, what we've done is worked with the faith, law enforcement, and business community in those 3 regions. And this is all complementary to all the work that Clarissa said, or talked about, in terms of the growing power of the new American vote. Without that power, that political power of the new American vote, everything that we're doing as an organization to engage a political center or create a political center around immigration reform doesn't go anywhere. So it all kind of culminated for us last week, where with our partners at the Partnership for New American Economy, the Chamber of Commerce, Forward.us, and the Evangelical Immigration Table, over 600 conservative Bibles, badges, and business were in town advocating for immigration reform. And we've been looking at the impact. I mean, there have been nearly 800 news stories, local and national. There were nearly 180 meetings with offices. I think over 120 of those meetings were with Republican members themselves. So all of a sudden, Republican members of Congress are meeting with the constituents that they're going to go to, asking for a vote, an endorsement, and or a donation. And those folks are in their office saying, you know what? We need you to be good on immigration reform. So it's the pressure from the left and the support from the right that I think is really bringing us to a new place.
Superb. All right, Madeleine, I want to bring you into the conversation. You look at both domestic policy, but you're also very familiar with immigration policy in Europe. Can you just draw out a little picture for us, right? Just how is this issue evolving in different countries in Europe? Are they adopting any good habits, bad habits from us? Do they care what we do? Just tell us whether there are any connections across the pond.
It's interesting because some of the really big issues on the other side of the Atlantic are pretty similar, and some of them are really quite different. So one of the issues, for example, that's right at the top of the agenda in Europe, but that has not been so much part of the debate here, is immigrant integration. That's a huge concern at the moment, arguably the number one concern. We have very high unemployment rates among immigrants in a lot of countries. You've all heard about the shocking unemployment rates, especially youth unemployment in the southern European countries like Spain and Italy. So that has been one of the major concerns, and a lot of countries are looking at how they can be more strategic about trying to help immigrants to do better in the labor market. Many of them have instituted much more coordinated policies, thinking, from how can every different part of government contribute to helping immigrants to progress. And I think that's actually something that I think America has traditionally done quite well at immigrant integration, and as a result has ended up with a set of relatively laissez-faire approaches to it, and it actually might be useful to look across the Atlantic at some of the countries where their challenges have been bigger, but it's also pushed them to come up with some creative solutions. So I think that's an interesting area. Another hot topic in Europe, which is not really as big here, is refugee and asylum policy. The Europeans don't they don't accept many refugees, but they have quite a lot of asylum seekers. And that has been a really kind of a huge political and policy challenge for them, especially trying to work out how to deal with how to share the responsibilities of the asylum seekers that they receive. There are some tensions between the northern European countries that feel that they get a lot of asylum seekers who enter through the south and that the south shouldn't be letting them in, and then on the other side the southern countries feel that they're left with the burden of enforcing EU policies. So there are some very interesting issues there that we're lucky are not as controversial in the US. And then on the other side, I think there are some issues where the conversation is somewhat similar. European countries have also struggled with family immigration issues, how wide the right to family unification should be. They start from a very different place in the US. The US is exceptionally generous compared to European systems. So even after the kind of changes that we would see in the Senate bill, the US would still be much more generous than the vast majority of immigration of European countries, actually beyond Europe as well, Australia, Canada. And then I think another area, again, one where there are some lessons for the US is on economic employment-based immigration. Many of the issues that they face are the same. How can we select the types of immigrants who will contribute to the economy? The big difference between the Europeans and the Americans is that the Europeans are actually doing something, that changing their policies, that a lot of experimentation. They have done there are interesting ways in which they move people much more predictably from temporary to permanent residence. So here we have two totally separate systems for temporary and permanent residence. Both of them have numerical limits that lead to backlogs and waiting times. These issues are much less problematic in the EU. They've taken a somewhat more strategic approach to deciding what the policies are going to be, rather than just relying on a limit that says, in theory, you're allowed to come. In practice, you're not, because there's a waiting time of 10 years. So those are some of the areas I think that there are some lessons for the US from Europe.
All right, I hope we can get to those, particularly the integration ones. Governor, I want to go back to you for just a moment. Let's imagine that immigration reform doesn't happen. In the past, when that's been the case, particularly after the 2007 failure of the Senate to pass an immigration bill, we saw a churning, a heating up of state immigration laws that led to Arizona, Alabama, Georgia. At the same time, those are all states that pass anti-immigration legislation, but at the same time, we have at least 13 states that have passed state-level DREAM Acts. We've recently seen Governor Brown in California pass 2 progressive pieces of legislation regarding immigrants not being detained by police if they don't have any other kind of record, who are undocumented, and related to driver's licenses. So just make some predictions for me. If legislation doesn't happen, how do you see the states responding or not?
Well, you outlined some of the different responses that we've had as states. One of the ongoing bits of work that we have to do as a people is to restore the representative nature of our House of Representatives. When we lost on the eve of redistricting 1/3 of the 30 Democratic governors in our country, we lost for 10 years the congressional borders that might have been more conducive to compromise than we currently find them. Mm-hmm. So part of this drive here, I believe anyway, is that you have a bit of, in the proud party of Lincoln, you have them hamstrung by an ideology that sometimes even appears to be a throwback to the era of the know-nothings and nativists. And I believe that one of the more persuasive arguments to those sort of narrow-minded policies are those states where we're actually building the innovation economy, where people are more involved in the economic life and innovation in every way. And we need to win back some of these we need to win back governorships in states that send large congressional districts to Washington. And we have the opportunity to do that because there are 36 of them up in 2014. This year there's only 2, right? We have Virginia and New Jersey. But next year there's actually 36 of these states up. And if enough of them swing, I believe that the writing will be on the wall, so to speak, in terms of the men and women that will hold those redistricting pens in their second term. So politics matters, and politics is important. And frankly, one of the frustrations I've had on this immigration issue is that some of the very committed and dedicated people that want to see a positive change happen for the sake of our country don't like to get involved in messy, dirty politics like electing a new governor in this state or a new governor in that state. And some of the people that care so very, very much about this would love to fund and would generously fund big new foundations dedicated to immigration reform. What we really need are some men and women who run for governor of big democratic states so we can get the representative nature of our House of Representatives back. All of the polling says that the public broadly in our country understands we need this. Well, why is it then that the House of Representatives won't allow it to happen? We've got some business to tend to in fixing the mechanics of our democracy.
Well said. All right, I've just zeroed in on the time. Thanks, Ali, for loaning me your watch, because I came up here without my electronic device. I realized I stopped wearing a watch. I had no idea what time it was. But since we started a little bit late, I do want the other 3 panelists to answer one of the last questions I prepared, and then I'll open it up to you all to ask questions. So, Clarissa, you've been at this a long time. It's deeply personal to you, this issue. What does victory look like for you?
Well, I think, in terms of looking at the victory, it's important to look at why is this a galvanizing issue for Latinos, right? And I think that the easiest answer for me is that it is an existential question. The effect of the toxicity in the immigration debate has been to deeply question the very presence of Latinos in our country, even though Latinos have been here since the birth of the nation, are part of its present and future progress. And so when you have a situation where 75% of the Latino population in the United States are United States citizens, and every time you mention that statistic, you see people be surprised by it, it kind of gives you an explanation of why it has become such a galvanizing issue. One, because 67% of us who are voters know someone who is undocumented, but 2, because also it doesn't matter if you've been here for 300 years, your family obviously, otherwise,
You'd
that
be
might
really
be in
old.
Dracula territory. But it doesn't matter how long you've been here. The result of the laws we're talking about is that people have license to question your very presence, your sense of belonging to this country, regardless of the contributions you may have made. And so, to me, that at the end of the day really goes to the question of why our country has such a tortured path and experience with immigration. And I think that the fever has broken. The patient is not fully restored, but the fever has broken, as we have seen from laws like Arizona and others starting to be overcome, and instead seeing more productive, constructive laws at the state and local level. But part of it is really addressing this question of who is worthy of being considered an American. So going back to what success is to me, on the one hand, from a very practical perspective, our country needs a modernized immigration system that responds both to the opportunity and the needs that our economy, that businesses have, but also that families have, right? The ability to be with your loved ones without fear of seeing them disappear overnight or in the course of a day. So if we maintain and strengthen, modernize a system that it's really true to the cornerstones of what have dominated our system, employer-based, family-based, in a way that reflects a 21st century society, but that it's built on a platform that acknowledges that we have an undocumented population that has been growing as a result of the lack of the outdated nature of that system, and that, yes, there has to be a way for that population to make restorations, but that we have all been complicit in that situation, and we are intertwined in the lives of those folks, and what happens to them affects us. So a path that allows for them to come forward out of the shadows, and yes, people are willing to pay a fine and to go through background checks and all kinds of things, but it has to be real. And it cannot be one that moves us away from the path we walked and start looking back at how do we create separate categories of people whom, regardless of what merit or contribution they make, today politicians will say you never can earn the right of calling yourself an American. So avoiding that, learning our lessons, modernizing our system, and building on our aspirations rather than detracting from them is what victory is for me. And I think we have the strength to get there.
Great. All right. So I'm going to jump to you, Madeleine. Let's say that the politics is out. The policy nerds are in. You get to shape the perfect immigration policy for this country, and it's going to pass like that because they get to vote anonymously. What does it look like to you?
Excellent. Well,
Let me fantasize.
We have a number of reports on this topic, and I won't bore you with their entire content, but I'll mention just a couple of things. I think that it would be nice to see the U.S. move away from its obsession with numerical limits. Numerical limits are not a very effective way to run an immigration system. It's, we turn on the tap and then we turn it off again with no regard to, what happened in the meantime. And other countries actually don't rely on numerical limits to anywhere near the same extent. They decide who they're going to let in and who they're not going to let in, and kind of think about that in a more strategic way. So the numerical limits, I think, are causing a lot of unpredictability. I'm not saying that we have to totally throw open the doors and have absolutely anyone who likes to come be able to get here, but just thinking through more, what are the eligibility criteria going to be? Who do we want and who do we not want? Rather than relying on this halfway house where we pretend that people are eligible but then don't actually let them in. So I think that would be a major change that it would be useful to see. On a related note, I think a lot more flexibility, ways to introduce flexibility into the system so that we don't go for 20 years between legislating my organization, the Migration...
Working so well.
Yeah, my organization, the Migration Policy Institute, has suggested that there should be a bureau that would study how the immigration system, what are the impacts of the immigration system, who's coming in, and how do they work their way through the system, and give us a way to make more regular and more informed decisions about that. And then the last thing, I think, to come back to this point of immigrant integration, I think that deserves a higher place on the agenda in the United States. There is a lot of really good work going on at the state level and also among community-based organizations, which are actually the envy of European policymakers on the other side of the pond. But I think that we could do more as a country federally to support those organizations and the state level policies. The Senate bill that passed earlier this year raised a lot of revenue in various ways and spent it in other ways, but immigrant integration was not a major beneficiary of that spending in the bill. And so I think there's much more that could be done to support kind of immigrant integration programs and also the states that receive immigrants to make sure that once they get here, they can actually succeed.
Excellent. All right, I nominate you.
Done.
All right, so Ali, you've worked at progressive state and local organizations. You now rub shoulders all the time with very conservative evangelicals. So I think you've got probably the broadest view of who are supporters. How do we get to the finish line?
Well, I wanted to actually pick up on what the governor was saying in terms of kind of how the states could change in the future. I mean, what we're finding is that, across the South, for example, there are, farmers, pastors, police chiefs, big business owners, small business owners who want to be a part of an immigration solution. And in some ways, This strategy that we've implemented is probably one of the easiest things that we've ever done because people wanted to engage. Conservative faith law enforcement and business leaders, they wanted to be a part of this debate, and they wanted to be able to go in to their member of Congress and say, you know what, we care about this. And what I always go back to is, for us, a lot of this started in the state of Utah, not exactly on the, no chance of Utah turning blue. And there was this dinner we pulled together the night before this event, and in the room were, the Republican Attorney General, farmers from Idaho and Wyoming, the Catholic Church, and these were folks who said, through and through, they were politically conservative. And I asked this question at the beginning of the dinner, as we were eating. I said, what brings you here? Why are you here tonight, and why are you going to share your story tomorrow? To a room of 200-300 people and press throughout the Mountain West. And to a person, each one talked about the immigrant that they knew as a friend, not as a worker, but almost as like part of their extended family. And it ended up being a dinner where around the table people shared their stories of knowing the immigrant community and crying. And I'm thinking, I was not expecting a support group. But it was so authentic, it was so real. And it was at that moment, and this was, December of 2010, where I realized, you know what, we're a lot closer than we've ever been if we can create the spaces and the opportunities for people to engage on their terms and in their language.
Great answers, everybody. You guys are terrific panelists. And now we're going to open it up to the audience so that they can ask you questions as well. I think the gentleman up there has a mic. If you just put your hand up. If you have a question. Lady right there.
Hello. Thank you for coming and talking about this major issue right now. And my question is to anybody in the panel who wants to address it, but what are the main differences between the Obama and Bush administration when it comes to the rates of deportation? I know a lot of people always, especially on the conservative side, say that Obama deported way more people than Bush did, but I'm wondering if there's a backside to the story.
Clarissa,
I think the short answer is it's true. The Obama administration has deported more people than any previous administration. I think the calculation is that right now deportations are at the rate of over 1,000 people per day, which is frankly having devastating consequences, not only in immigrant communities, but again, going back to the previous comments about the intertwined nature of immigrants in the family unit as well as in our economy. It's reverberating at many different levels. So it is true, and I think as part of the overall, the efforts of many, there are multiple fronts in this fight. Partly is the legislative piece that many of us talked about. The other one is making sure that the administration actually, while Congress takes action, there are things that the administration can do to diminish the devastating effects of those policies we're seeing right now.
And if I could just add on that also, it's also from the Obama administration that the changes with regard to the Dream Kids came into being from the very same Obama administration and Department of Homeland Security. It was also the Obama administration, or rather President Obama as a leader, who highlighted as one of the ongoing stories of the Democratic National Convention on national television, the plight and the hope and the potential of the Dream Kids. Not once, not just on one night, check that box and get done with the immigration and the Dream Kids. It was part of the fabric of a growing and ever more diverse and ever more inclusive America too. And I believe what I see the President, and I've served on the Homeland Security Advisory Councils, and it's actually Manny Diaz who was on that, the former mayor of Miami, who was pushing this use of the Secretary's powers and the prosecutorial discretion bubbled up from that committee. There is I believe that President Obama is trying to hold that creative tension that allows us to find a way forward. And part of holding that creative tension is also building a growing consensus in America overall, part of which requires a commitment to enforcing the law. And it's not easy, and it affects different families sometimes in very devastating ways. But I mean, that's what I see the president attempting to do as a leader in this space.
Any other comments to the question? I mean, just to round it out, just to look at enforcement broadly, the Obama administration does have very different approaches than the Bush administration did. There were SWAT-style-like raids where you saw workers rounded up under the Bush administration and employers, basically getting nothing more than a slap on the wrist. There has been none of those. Those kinds of raids have greatly diminished. I mean, especially the big style. They don't happen anymore. And you have, frankly, seen more employers that are getting fined and more pursuit of those kinds of immigration violations. You've seen changes to detention standards that have improved conditions for people and also awareness of not separating families. So there have been changes like that it's not just nibbling around the edges, but at least it is an effort to be more sensitive than what we saw under the Bush administration, which was also quite brutal. All right, any other questions? The gentleman there.
Hi. What were the policy failures of the 1986 or 87 reform that led us to where we are now, and what mechanisms or policy elements are in this comprehensive package in the Senate that will prevent us from having to do this again in 25 years and 25 years after that and so on?
All right, that's a great question. Why didn't 1986 work, and how are we going to be sure we don't make those same mistakes again? Madeleine, you want to take a quick crack at that, and I can round it up? Or I know, Clarissa, you're pretty familiar with IRCA.
Sure. So one of the big innovations of the 1986 law was to introduce the responsibility for employers to verify the legal status of their employees. The issue was that the system that was introduced was not particularly effective. And so it was very much vulnerable to fraud. It was very easy for people to present the documents that they had to present to the employer and present themselves as authorized even when they weren't. So one of the goals of the new legislation, one of the things on which there's a reasonable amount of bipartisan compromises in both the House and the Senate versions of the bills, would be to create a more foolproof system for electronic verification. A system known as E-Verify. Now that system also has some problems. One of the major ones is that it also actually it confirms as authorized quite a number of people who are not actually authorized to work. There are some attempts to fix that, but it's something that is quite difficult to do perfectly. It's a question of getting it far enough such that both the individuals concerned and the employers don't feel that they can take a risk on the system, they have to only employ people who are authorized.
Clarissa, any other comments on the 1986 IRCA legislation?
Very briefly, because I know that you probably have a lot to add on that too. But I think one of the key problems with 86 is that it actually did very little to get our legal immigration system on the rhythm it needed to have, right? So in addition to the cutoff date alone meant that the date you signed it, you already had an undocumented population, right? In addition to that, it did not fix our legal immigration system. And so if you are not creating avenues that make it more appealing for people to go through the system rather than around it, right? You're creating incentives for families not to be together and therefore have to decide between being separated or breaking the law, or what has happened in our economy quite a bit, which is that employers could not get the workers they needed, but they knew that there was a little bit of a wink and a nod system where they could still get away with employing them. So if you don't have those systems that work well, we indeed ended up creating incentives for people to go through the black market. And that's why I keep saying how modernizing those legal channels are going to be essential for us not to repeat the situation that we have now. And I think it goes to Madeleine's points about how do you adjust numbers so that they are responsive and elastic. And let me emphasize, they need to be elastic to respond to the economy, but they also need to be done in a way that is complementary to the American workforce and not to undermine American workers and their rights. I think that would be one of the main things.
Well said. Governor Ali, anything to add to that on IRCA? Okay, good. Any other questions?
Good evening. My name is David Davila, and I'm an intern at the Center for Migrant Progress. And I wanted to thank each of you for this evening and providing this panel. My question is in regards to young Latino millennials. What can they expect from immigration reform? How will it affect them physically? Thank you.
Physically, well, there's a couple of things I would say, and this is the other reason why I am optimistic, and many folks have talked about our country is changing in many ways. It's not just about Latinos growing, but I think that part of what's very encouraging is that younger generations do not have to adapt to diversity. They've been born in diversity. They're more comfortable with being around people who are different and being in communities that change, right? After all, millennials are part of a community where technology is your everyday medium, and that is a medium that changes every day. For Latinos in particular, I think there's a very interesting thing happening. There's about 2,457 Latino citizens per day turning 18. Latino citizens per day, over 2,000 turning 18 every day. Those folks, I think, are people who, because they know friends, family, co-workers who are undocumented, in many ways, their political map is also being shaped by this issue. And in many ways, because of the devastating effects of inaction, it's also linking the ability of being engaged in their community and in politics as a way to solve that problem. So I think that there's a very direct connection that has actually creating an incredible amount of activism among young Latinos. And you've seen it definitely in Dreamers, who are directly impacted because of their own status, but it doesn't stop there. It's much wider than that. And I think for anybody who cares about, this is not about Latinos. I do want to emphasize that. The Latino agenda is an American agenda. For anybody who cares about healthy communities, access to good housing, to good quality jobs, the growth of the Latino electorate is a welcome development, because these are the issues that drive the aspirations of this community. So I think that's the direct impact it's having. And I am hoping, and there's a lot of work being done by young leaders to make sure that it's connected to the community, the polls, and eventually to affecting the policies that affect their communities.
But you know what would happen right away that Latino millennials would feel, and everyone would feel, if the bill became law, is removals would stop for a period of time while we would assess whether the person who's in removal or deportation proceedings is eligible for relief or not. People who are in detention would be evaluated whether they're eligible for relief, and they would get to leave detention. And we detain how many people a day? Thousands and thousands and thousands of people a day. So it's not just Latino millennials, as Clarissa was saying, but the physical thing that people will feel and see every day is a huge exhale. The throat, the boot that's on their throat will get taken off.
Can I ask the governor a question? And kind of after the DREAM Act passed in Maryland, what was the experience, and what kind of feedback did you get from the young Latino community?
What was the vibe there?
Yeah.
Well, I'll tell you, cats and dogs didn't fall from the sky. It's not like the earth stopped moving. The feedback in our state goes beyond the Dream Kids, or goes beyond our Latino community, really.
Sure.
It really, it really goes to the heart of who we are as a people. And that's some of the most important work that we have to be about right now as Americans, is healing that heart of our democracy, that ability to hold creative tensions, that appreciation for the value of otherness and what that does for us as a people. So I think the bigger effect that it had was that we continued to roll forward as a people. Nothing cataclysmic happened, but more kids are now able to live in the full light of our state. And economically, we're doing much better than most states. And I think that's another key factor here. One of the things that the diversity of our population has made great in our country is our talent for innovation. And with so many of your people in Silicon Valley, when I say your people, I mean the people in your business group, self-described as more conservative, but they're entrepreneurs, aren't they? They understand innovation, they understand creative people, they understand that the more diversity, the better the vibe in terms of creating jobs and creating opportunities. And I think that's I think that was reinforced in our state with this act as well.
All right, I think we have time for one more question. In the back.
Thank you. As a young person, thank you. As a young person, I'm constantly looking for platforms to push for immigration reform and progress. And I'm curious to get your opinion, what you think it's the most effective way to do this. Do you think it has to be a grassroots effort or more of a legislative push? I also, on more of a personal note, was wondering what it means to you to be an American. What is that definition?
Okay. So we're going to go right down the line and answer your question and wrap up with that. So what's our view on most effective advocacy that a young person can do, and what does it mean to be an American? And I'm so lucky that I'm moderating, I don't have to go first. So but I'm going to turn to, oh my God, Governor pointing to someone. Like, what?
I am spectacularly unqualified to answer both of those questions. I'm just a humble economist, and I'm not an American. Pass me another.
Nice job, girl.
We're just all trying to buy time for a really succinct,
like nothing's
eloquent
coming
answer.
to me.
My answer, I have the same answer to both questions.
Nicely done.
Yeah, I like that, right? I'm even going to steal the governor's line.
Very Irish.
Right. I mean, the same answer. It's how we participate in America's democracy is up to us. Our only job is to participate.
Clarissa?
All right.
Oh, is that the answer to what it means to be an American?
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I agree with Ali. I don't think that there's any. I don't think that there's any right way or one way that is righter than another. What I mean is, there is grassroots work that needs to happen. It can be all the way from helping immigrants become citizens and integrate into their communities. I think that is very important to also fight the notion and the rejection that sometimes happens that's standing in the way on some people supporting reform. I think the legislative effort is important. I think the electoral effort is incredibly important. So it's the convergence of the ability to bring all those things together that has really put us in a different place than where we've been in the past. I was born and raised in Mexico, so that probably explains why I'm not as succinct as Ali. But and what it means to be an American, I think as an immigrant, as somebody who actually legalized through the last legalization, I would say that the ability to be accepted and not questioned because I'm a Latina. That people can look at me and think first that I'm an American rather than the other way around. As an initial assumption, I think getting to that day is my aspiration.
Well said. I believe there are all sorts of opportunities that present themselves to become involved. In our effort in Maryland, we had a state version of the DREAM Act. In other counties, people might be mobilizing in order to bring about more rational, more effective, better standards of policing, particularly when it comes to immigrant communities. And there is always an election around the corner of our members of Congress, but also of our governors. And the people that we elect, the leadership matters, and the people that we elect matter. And right now there has never been a broader consensus for immigration reform, and yet we have our primary representative institution, the House of Representatives, struggling to do that which the broad public supports. So we have to not lose faith, and we have to keep working. And if you can work to elect a Democratic governor in one of those large states with lots of congressional members, where the lines were drawn in such a way as to protect them from the more rational appeals of the broader majority, that too would be a good place. As far as what it means to me to be an American is to believe in the dignity of every individual, to believe in our own responsibility to advance the common good and the greater good, and to understand that we're all in this together, and that we have a role to play in this world, to make it a better world, a more just world, to heal this world, and to give it to our children in better shape than we received it ourselves. That's what it means to be an American to me, and that's what it meant to be an American to my great-grandfather when he came here.
So I'll also answer, since I've gotten the most time. No one knows the answer to your first question, because that playbook is being written like right now by your generation in terms of what's the most effective advocacy. I have seen dreamers walk from Miami to Washington. That's a very low-tech way, but they made an extraordinary statement and were incredibly effective. And I've also seen them go on hunger strikes and dare to be arrested. So that and every social media platform out there, just do it all. Do it all in whatever way you can. And then I think for what it means to be an American, sort of the genius of this nation is that it means something different to everyone. But I can tell you for me, my grandmother sent my mother and her 5 sisters to this country in the 1960s and 70s from Bolivia to Washington. She put them on a plane. There was no cell phones, there was no Skype, there was no internet, there was nothing like that. I mean, it was incredible as I think about it as a mother of 2 daughters myself. And she finally came to the U.S. and she got her residency, and she's 95 years old. She made a point of becoming naturalized. She wanted to vote for President Obama. She just thought it was terrific that she could live in a country where an African American could become president. And I visit her every Sunday. We have little Baileys together. And she doesn't see very well, but when she tells me about her week coming up, what she told me on Sunday was, and on Tuesday, I'm going to go vote. To me, that's what it means to be an American. Anyway, so I think with that, we will close. My thanks again to the terrific folks at NYU and to all of you for coming this evening. Thank you very much.